So I have the pleasure of having Dr. David Fawcett join us tonight. Dr. Rob was traveling for a conference, and so Dr. Fawcett graciously agreed to join the site tonight and answer everyone's questions. We're grateful for that. Dr. Fawcett behind him has a copy of his book, Lust, Men, and Meth, and he can tell you a little bit more about. Oh, he's got a, yes, it's
My
almost
prop.
like Vanna White. Here you go.
My working copy, I know.
That was awesome. So, okay. So he'll tell you a little bit more about that. He's an expert in chemsex and many other things, but I've learned so much. He has a podcast on sexandrelationshiphealing.com that I found fascinating. He gave a lot of great information, but I don't often get the chance to work with him, but I was able to do the first webinar that he did, and he did one on resiliency, and he had many tools to use, like the whole concept of building resiliency. I always thought you either had resiliency or you didn't, and he clarified things for me, and I really appreciated that. So I invite you to go listen to some of his others and join him. He's on the second and fourth Wednesdays of the month on this site at 5 p.m. Pacific time. So I invite you to join that. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, tell the group about yourself, and then we'll start with questions.
Okay, thanks, Tammy. Hi, everybody. My name's David, Dr. David Fawcett. I'm in Fort Lauderdale. I'm a therapist, psychotherapist, and a sex therapist here. Been working in that field for about more than 20 years. Like Tammy, you say, you don't give a specific age, it's like I'll do the same thing, sort of a long time, let's say that. Just have really, over that time, gotten more and more involved in the area of sex addiction per se. I started out working mostly with men who have sex with men, gay, bi, trans men who are using drugs in addition to sex, a phenomenon we're starting to call chemsex, and particularly methamphetamine, which happens also, by the way, among heterosexuals too. So a lot of my work has been done, and the book is really how to heal sex and intimacy following recovery from the drastic effects of meth use and some other drugs. But along the way, I do a lot of work with relationships and intimate disorders and other kinds of issues. So I was pleased Rob asked me to step in, and happy to be here.
And we are glad you are here. So the first question is someone that's new to this forum, and I appreciate that. I'm just learning about all the many issues related to sex addiction. My partner of 17 years claims he has an addiction, and this has always been a problem. He recently got someone pregnant who was very close with our family, someone who was a friend, and I'm so angry and hurt, understandably. This is when he finally told me this was an issue. Is it common for those with a problem don't disclose until they are backed into the corner? How can I ever forgive him? I love him, and I'm pregnant too, and we just had our second son after 9 years of trying. I want to make things work, but how? I'm starting counseling with him. I'll go on, and so let's start with that and start unpacking that. So the first thing is, he recently. So can this really be a thing? Is it common for them to only disclose when their back is up against a wall?
So I would start just by saying that's probably the most typical behavior of any addiction, not just sex addiction, but one of the key things is secrecy and the ability to kind of have these different walls and around parts of one's life so that people, even the ones closest to us, like our partners, often aren't aware of this whole secret life that's going on. It's unfortunately extremely common, and it's a classic hallmark of addictive disorders where the addict protects that behavior or their supply if it's drugs, no matter what. That's where some of the dishonesty, I think, about addiction comes in, and the manipulation and the protection of that secret. And so I think that's extremely common. I do want to say I'm just sorry for the situation you're in. It sounds extremely complex and a lot of emotional pain, including hurt and anger, which I think are very normal responses to the situation you're in. But in terms of the secrecy, that's absolutely part of it. And oftentimes it does come out in kind of a horrific way by some surprise, an accidental discovery on the computer or some revelation or something like that just bursts this whole thing open. And of course, the natural reaction of the partner is going to be a sense of betrayal and hurt. Like how could this person, man or woman that I love so much, have this whole other life? And what does that say about me? And I think those are the issues that we often have to address early on. I think at this point in this scenario for you, I'm really glad you're starting to see a specialist tomorrow, because this requires, I think, not just a psychotherapist, but someone who can address these issues and know and understand what you're going through at this point. It's not regular couples therapy. There's a very special dynamic that goes on with this. And I've seen more damage done by people seeing therapists that didn't understand these dynamics. So I'm glad you're seeing a specialist. The credential we often look for is a CSAT, Certified Sex Addiction Therapist, but other sexologists are totally competent to handle that as well. But I think it's important to take care of yourself at this moment. And I believe it's healthy at this stage to kind of each retreat to your corners and get the help you need for you. I mean, you got a lot of confusion about your feelings, I'm sure, a lot of anger, way to express them, a lot of conflict about wanting to repair the relationship, but all this anger at the same time. So all those feelings really need to be worked through with you and someone, and then ultimately come back and hopefully with communication, sometimes facilitated by a therapist, start to maneuver that with your partner. But I think what you're going through is a really tough situation. It's not all that unusual, unfortunately, but I think right now the watchword for you is to take care of you and get in touch with your feelings. I will say one more thing is that sex addicts often, when they get in recovery, they honestly believe they've turned a corner, they're a different person, that whole world has fallen apart, and they want that trust back from their partner fairly quickly, almost very quickly. And that trust is not going to be given back so easily by their partner. And so there's this, they're out of sync in terms of the expectation. So just be aware of that too. There's no timetable for this healing. There's no one right path to start with you and take care of your feelings and your needs right now.
Yeah, I so agree. And particularly, I mean, you're pregnant, so it's taking care of you and your baby. And I see that he's starting counseling with a specialist tomorrow. So I agree with David. I hope it's a CSAT therapist, but you deserve support too. And Dr. Rob's book, Prodependence, Moving Beyond Codependency, is a great new book. And it is about how to support you in this crisis, and it's relatively new, but there are therapists that are totally aligned with this. So, if you don't have a support therapist already identified, please contact me and let me know, tomorrow via email where you're located, and I'll help you find the right person for that. But I agree too with David that, this isn't couples, counseling, and he really does need to work on this problem. A couple of books, Sex Addiction 101 and the workbook, are great. They're the primer for working on sex addiction. Out of the Doghouse is how to start building back trust, but you do not have to forgive him. I mean, that's a long-term thing, and you need to be angry. You need to to feel the hurt and betrayal. I mean, you don't need to trust him right away. He needs to build that back in. But those tools can be really helpful for you. There's also podcasts on some of those on the sexandrelationshiphealing.com as well. But yes, get some support. So then you also had another continuation. Can men overcome this if it is in many areas of his life? I'm assuming that you're saying that the sex addiction is pervasive in his life, or addiction in general is pervasive in his life.
Right. So I'll answer that from kind of the bigger spectrum there. And that really goes to the heart of what I treat a lot, was with this mixture of, if it is, I'm not saying your husband is, but if the addiction is spread from sex, it's very common for it to spread to drugs as well, other kinds of behaviors, impulsive behaviors. What happens with all these behaviors, especially sex and stimulants, is that it kind of builds up this level of chasing intensity that people become kind of addicted to in and of itself, of the biochemistry of it that goes on in our bodies. And so it's very common for people to not maybe quite get the thrill from porn or prostitutes or whatever, and so they start mixing drugs with it, or they do what we call stacking, adding combinations of things. So it's very, very common. It's also very common to it's necessary to really get rid of that addictive behavior in all the areas, no matter where it's expressed. I think a lot of times people want to bargain. They want to take this one but leave that one, and it's all a slippery slope unless you just kind of cut those off. I have and we're taking a lot of time with this question, but I do want to say one more thing about, since you're new to this, and I'm going back to that statement, the really brilliant part about Rob Zuba Pro Dependence is that so many therapists, when someone in your situation goes in to see them, the old kind of codependency model will, while you're in this kind of crisis state, will start to look at, well, tell us about your childhood and what's wrong with you to have been involved with this or even brought this on. And this is not your fault. And this is not anything you've done. You're trying to, as you've said, you're trying to repair your family, and you have a young family. So make sure when you do get a therapist, and I agree with Tammy, you totally should get one, make sure they're on board with this kind of concept of working through to support you in this moment of crisis.
So, and I agree with all that. So the next piece of it is, how do I make sure he's being truthful in the future? And there is a process that is called disclosure, where there's full disclosure, but that would be the foundation. But he's going to need time of working with a specialist. You're going to need time of working with a support person, because and I mean this with love and care. He only told you what you had to find out because there's another woman pregnant. So there's other things, and you don't need to know all the details, but you do need to know. And so, so working with support people, eventually there's disclosure. And if he's doing a program of recovery, and there's a lot of tools, like I said, in Out of the Doghouse, that I think you'll find, super helpful in rebuilding trust. But it's going to be a long road, and he's going to have to, if he says he's going to be home at 5:30, if it's 5:37, and he hasn't called you and said, I'm, traffic, I mean, he's going to have to show up and do what he says he
and be accountable.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that, David?
I think that's good.
Okay. And do we tell our oldest son, who is 9, I want to scream, no kid wants to know about their parents' sex life. Trust me. So, it's one of those things where you can say, Mommy and Daddy are having a difficult time right now, and it's not about you, and we're working on it. It's got nothing to do. We both love you and all that kind of stuff. But, I mean, he can't unhear this stuff. So, I implore you to protect both of your children, so, yeah. Do I go to a specialist for treatment as a betrayed partner? Yes, I've already talked about that. But I would ask them if they agree with prodependence, because I have had so many, even just in the last couple of days, people reach out and go, the therapist told me it was my fault, and I'm part of the problem. There is nothing you could have done or not done to make this, to have him choose this behavior. But I am also going to say, like alcoholism, while he's acting out sexually, and he may be doing other things, it isn't about the alcohol. It isn't about the sex. It's about numbing out. It's about escaping. And I'm not making excuses. He doesn't have the tools to cope with life on life's terms. And so it's the escape and not feeling. And so recovery, if he really works on that, he can find tools that will work to support him in the recovery process. So
tools and people, I would add. I think
yes.
Connection is so important. So he's going to have to devote time to going to his support groups and even therapy groups or whatever to get, because I believe that social connection is really the key to healing.
Yes. And you said, what advice do you have for people that are new to learning about their partner's betrayal? This is great. This is a great place for you to start and get education. sexandrelationshiphealing.com is full of information. There's actually a partners drop-in group at 12:30 Wednesday. Brittany Mangum moderates that. So it's a little different format, but it is people that are experiencing betrayal or have, that are on the path of recovery on that. And you'll get a chance to get support, from other people that have been through this or are going through it. It really is a very, very worthwhile opportunity. So I'd encourage you to check that out too. Okay, so next question. There are 4 electronic monitoring software packages listed on the website. How were these 4 picked? Oh, wow, that's good. I'm gonna own being stumped on this. When I Googled looking for reviews and found other software packages, not the 4 listed, which were reviewed as being better. You know what? I'll tell you, my thoughts on this, unless you have some specifically, are technology is constantly changing, and I don't know. I mean, those were probably put up when the site was, added a year ago. So I would always go with the latest reviewed and newer. So, and you can feel free to reach out, and I will ask Scott, who might know more about that. But like we just give resources, and we do our best. But I bet if I looked every week, there's probably a new, new option for things. So, good evening. A couple quick questions. I hear a lot from the partner who discusses sex addicts' love avoidance behavior. Where are all these addicts? What happens in general? Do the partners leave them? Just curious. So I hear a lot from the partner who discusses the sex addicts' love avoidance behavior. Where are all these addicts? What happens to them in general? Do the partners just leave them? Just curious. So thoughts on that?
Well, they're out there. I'll start with that. Oftentimes we hear from the partners as the ones kind of reaching out in that effort to save or help the relationship. I think addicts in general and sex addicts, even in recovery, tend to be low profile because there is initially shame around that. I think a lot of shame with the addiction that kind of leads to it. But then once they're in recovery and starting to heal, I think there's such judgment and stigma about it from the outside world that I do think it's kind of low key sometimes. I would say they're certainly out there. And I would say that for couples that can do the work, do their own work, healing is absolutely possible. There are thousands of couples who have maneuvered these kind of treacherous waters and experience really the joy of that healing process. I have many clients and couples who were at a real crisis point in terms of addictive behavior of one or both. And after some time, and it takes patience and time, they're at a really much deeper place in terms of intimacy and connection and at a deeper level of connection and love than they've ever had before. So these tools work, and it just takes time and patience. I think one of the mistakes I see people making sometimes is that they apply a timetable to what this should be like. And oftentimes that's much too soon. So this takes time to heal. Some of it is brain pathways rewiring. Some of it is rebuilding connections. Some of it is dealing with old issues that got us in trouble in the first place. And all the messiness of what we've done in our lives as an acting out addict. So they're there. But I think it's important that that idea of patience is really a forefront because it takes time.
Yeah, I really think so too. And, I've heard so often the fear of an addict who has to approach sex in a different way than they did when they were acting out, particularly if they were using other things like stimulants or whatever. And so the fear of having sex and intimacy, is really scary for them. So, and Dr. Rob talked the other day about, somebody who was in long-term sobriety, and he said invariably they go, yeah, I haven't had sex in 12 years. And, and that's not the point. So what we are really trying to do on this platform is, have people learn to connect with each other and have healthy attachments, not, active sex addiction or active love avoidance. It's like eating disorders. We want to have a healthy relationship with food, not, overeat or not eat, so it's complicated, but recovery in its best form is really a wonderful thing. So
I'll say one more thing about that if I can, Tammy. The process that I've observed in the healing of both the individual and couples is one, and I work a lot with gay men, and I call it like a second coming out, because they have to learn how to have sex and be intimate and deal with all those fears and shame and internal judgment or whatever that was being kind of numbed. And Tammy used that magic word before, it numbed by the behavior, by the drug use, by the acting out. All that is a very effective way to detach from that stuff you want to listen to. And so when we're in recovery, there's no barrier between us and all those feelings. And so it's an incredible opportunity for healing, but it really does take time to resolve some of those issues that allow someone to be vulnerable or to be able to accept love. Oftentimes people that are hungry for love are kind of, in many ways, in subtle ways, like rebuffing it. So I think all those kind of things that have to heal take time.
Yes, and being patient with ourselves and the process is challenging.
Well, I'm sorry,
Go ahead, please.
I think you reminded me of an essential thing, I think, is that it's important for us to have compassion for ourselves, right? To really have self-compassion about what we've been through. Addict sometimes and partner, we have done the best we can and given this third party in our lives, right? This addiction. And I think I know from the point of view from an addict, and I'm in recovery, there's a lot of shame and guilt and judgment, sometimes trauma over the things that we've done to the people we love. And I think it's really important to own that, of course, be responsible for it. But at some point, try to have compassion for ourselves in order to love that, if nothing else, the child within, and kind of heal from that point out. So that self-compassion, I think, is really important.
I really agree. So I'm currently in a training set up in a beautiful hotel with a bunch of other people. I'm dying inside. I feel like the proximity to hot guys or even not so hot is killing me. I already have had an overshare with a sex addict who is located right next to me. Please let me know specifically how to deal with this for the next 5 weeks. Oh, that's a long time. So yeah, the thoughts on clearly triggers. So
right. So, boy, that is a long time to be in that situation. So I assume that you're working on apps like Grindr, Scruff, or whatever, or Straight or Gay. There's many of them. And I think those are one way that we keep that festering craving alive. And I think it's really troublesome and triggering for people. I recommend all my clients give up the apps. And give up all the profiles and just go offline, go off the grid, because many times I've heard people say, I'm not even looking to connect. I just kind of want to see who's out there. And that we know from brain scans, once you start thinking about it, it's kind of like a dog who starts to salivate, even though he hasn't had any food yet. The brain lights up just as if you've already acted out. And so the longer you kind of toy with that, the more inevitable it'll be that you will act out. So I think one of the first things you can do certainly is to go off the grid, if that's how you're doing it. The second thing would be, and I don't know if you said you're in recovery or not.
Yeah, I don't see that because I wondered the same thing, but I'm like, if you are in recovery, go ahead. Let's say if you are or aren't.
The other second really critical thing I would say is you need to connect with a healthy support system. And so if you're in recovery, you hopefully have that established already. Even if you're a hotel not geographically near them, you can certainly call or Skype or FaceTime and stay connected, because that social connection not only provides the accountability we were talking about before, but it provides support for you. And you can do something with these urges and triggers instead of acting out on them. It's really important to do that. So connection, getting off the grid, I think processing these feelings, and really, if you can go a little deep with them, like what's going on underneath there? Are you anxious about being in this setting? Do you have fear? Are you away from a situation at home where you don't feel you can have sex and now you're acting out? I don't know the scenario, but I think it's important to really drill a little deeper and understand what the triggers are, emotional triggers that are going on with you, and find other ways to deal with them. And that may be just writing them out, maybe taking a walk. Physical exercise, by the way, is, if the hotel is a gym, I would go work till you're drop dead tired, because that also is a great way to relieve that stress and to distract yourself. So those are the kind of immediate tools. You're in kind of a crisis setting, but I would sure rally your support if you can find it, and not act out. I would do everything you can, because that, I think you said you're in training. I mean, that's a really risky situation, right? It sounds like you could jeopardize occupation and so on. So, yeah.
So I was thinking when you were talking, David, and Dr. Rob shared this, and it's on a webinar, so I'm not taking something out of turn, but he talked about, he had an emotional situation and he was like, oh, screw it, I'm going to go act out and all this, and he's been in recovery long enough that he goes, what's really going on? And so he was able to look at what's the emotion behind that. And as soon as he was able to look at that, so like David was talking about, write out what's really going on. Is the training stressful? Are you having to put on an image? for this group or whatever. So look at what's underlying that. You said I'm dying inside. So is it like I would look at those things, because there is help and support for those things versus the acting out. So.
And this is not random behavior, right? This behavior is being triggered by something, and so feeling worthy or scared or performance anxiety or whatever might be going. But yeah, to try to get those feelings. And one little thing I always point out to my clients is that oftentimes anger is the feeling they're feeling, and I always say anger is a secondary feeling. You need to drop down below the anger to see what's really going on. It's usually hurt or fear.
Yeah.
If you're experiencing anger, you haven't gone all the way down into the feelings. That's a reaction.
Yeah.
So you drill down and see what's going on down there.
Yeah, that was a hard one for me, because it's far more powerful, and it felt better for me to be angry than to be hurt, because I'd rather be outward and blaming you rather than to go, oh, I'm feeling hurt and vulnerable. I didn't like that, but I had to learn to be okay with that and drill down in that. So
and that idea of producing intensity. Anger provides that intensity, right?
Yes,
Anger itself can be addictive. It can it can give you energy. It can. Yeah. We like the charge of it.
Yes. Yeah. To the point of rage. So yeah. Okay. Next question: why is it exciting, stimulating to chase unavailable people for sex and love addict? Well, Dr. Fawcett, why don't you answer that from a brain standpoint? So.
Well, that is almost a definition of exciting, right? There are some pillars of sexual desire, and one of them is longing and anticipation. And you probably have known couples that were long distance couples that usually situational, often they don't start out that way, and there's this kind of periods of time where they don't see each other. This kind of the sexual tension builds, the emotional tension builds. They come together. It's hot and fabulous, and then oftentimes if they work and finally reunite somewhere, the sizzle goes out of the relationship, right? They kind of lose part of their attraction was that distance and the unavailability of the other. So I think it's that it's a way that we start to kind of get triggered and get excited in terms of chasing someone that's unavailable. And it's kind of a game. I think there's some power dynamics in there, and I think it's basically a real setup, because what often happens is that that person truly is unavailable, either situationally, they're married or our best friend or something like that. And it's a terribly complicated situation to go down. And I think so that we at some point know that, but there's one of the sort of darker elements, I think, in sex addiction and drug addiction is this kind of idea of taboo also. And I think there's kind of an excitement at maybe going after somebody that for whatever reason might be inappropriate to go after or just unavailable. So I think it does build this tension that itself can be addictive. There's something called romance addicts, which I see a lot, and those are people that kind of fall in love with the fantasy of love, right? They meet someone, have coffee, and suddenly they're picking out their furniture in their mind and kind of thinking about how their life's going to be, and they go from 0 to 100 in 10 minutes. And I think folks that experience that are setting themselves up, because that kind of all comes crashing down until the next fantasy ideal comes into their lives and they can pursue it. So I think it's a painful process to be in, where you're trying to chase somebody who's unavailable. And I would go, what's really, just as we said earlier, what's really going on? Are you trying to prove your worthiness, or that you're lovable, or I don't know what's going on there, but it's useful to look at the situation and see what kind of emotional support might help you deal with that. Because it could, almost always, those kind of relationships just cause a lot of pain and complication, because oftentimes boundaries are crossed, or someone takes offense, and it just becomes problematic.
Well, and a lot of times when you actually get them, you don't want them. So, because it's the thrill of the chase, and that's the exciting part. So, and then you almost have to be attached and intimate with them, and that wasn't what you really wanted
That's
anyway.
not,
Yeah.
There's a great word, by the way, if people don't know, called limerence,
Yes.
which basically is that state when we first meet someone and fall in love, when we're kind of mentally ill, right? We're totally preoccupied with them. We're texting 50 times a day, and we can't really concentrate on work because we're just thinking about that person. It's a fabulous thing. And it's a neurobiological thing. So it helps us as humans bond, right? We attach, and those chemicals, oxytocin, other things flow and create that bond. But that only goes on for 3 or 4, maybe 6 months to the outside. And then those chemicals start to fade, and another balance opens up. And that provides an opportunity for relationships to grow deeper and more intimate and away from that kind of first puppy love phase. But a lot of people, especially romance love addicts, if you want to call it that, will when they experience that drop in limerence, feel, oh my God, I'm falling out of love, or they lose interest. And they've become addicted to the limerence itself, that idea of falling in love and how fabulous it is and being preoccupied.
So I'm going to, the person that's staying at the hotel says, I'm an addict, but I haven't had sex in over 6 months, living in the hotel with these people, not on any apps, and is working on exercising a lot. So that's an update on that. So, so we, you know, I mean, I don't think I can add any, I mean, I'm thinking this is great. Join, drop-in groups, listen to, I had one person that wrote and said, every time I think of relapsing, I listen to a podcast. I was like, great. Anything you can do to put good information in, and kind of stop the brain going, obsessing about something could be helpful.
And there are meetings, meetings both in virtual real time and also meetings online.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Okay, so I'm a woman, sex and love addict. I'm 3 months in SLAA and dealing with a fair amount of stress with work right now. My awareness of how I sexualize stress is coming up now through my SLAA reading, etc. Where does this tendency come from? I'm not a big drinker and I don't use drugs, but I definitely feel extremely irritated when I'm stressed out and I want to act out.
Okay, wow, there's a couple of things in there. One, just to touch on what we talked about like 5 minutes ago with the anger, right? Irritation, that's not the core feeling. So I'd encourage you to drill down and see what's really going on there under that, whether it's fear or hurt or some other kind of primary emotion. Good for you for starting to look at some of these, the ways that we sexualize stress. We take that stress and convert it into sexual behavior. Though understanding those kind of triggers and patterns are going to be tremendously important for your healing. Where do they come from? I think this goes way back. And I think that's the problem with adults as addicts, is that early on, typically the dynamic is that there's some kind of problem in often a child's environment, and they protect themselves the best way they can. Children don't have verbal skills. They can't care for themselves. They can't feed themselves. They need shelter. So to survive, they kind of dissociate or can disconnect from certain parts of themselves, right? And that pattern of numbing and dissociation becomes kind of a normal way of doing things. And that was certainly true with me. I grew up in an alcoholic household, learned early on how to detach. Some of it was very productive. I got into piano. Lost myself in music, but other times I just kind of lost myself in fantasy of whether it was travel, it wasn't sexual. But those patterns of kind of losing myself, of how to escape when I was feeling uncomfortable, just the moment I was able to find a drug or alcohol, and it was alcohol first, my God, that just was magic. And it was like I almost set up my life to prepare for that moment. And so it doesn't, not just drugs, but sexual behavior, other kinds of what we call process addictions, like eating disorders or gambling or even workaholism, all those things give us that ability to detach from feelings that are uncomfortable and stressful things. And so I think it's great what you're going through. I know it's going to be painful, but this is the core work that's really going to lay the foundation for the rest of your recovery, because these are the patterns that are lifelong. In my experience, they're not even conscious sometimes. We have to kind of go back. For me, I have to go back and with my clients, look at a behavior and say, okay, well, gee, what led up to that? You kind of have to do reverse engineering to kind of figure out these patterns. And good for you. They're there. I would say they're probably really old. And also remember then, if once we establish those patterns, if stress comes up, or if an argument with our boyfriend or girlfriend comes up, or a problem with our kids, what do? We go to our number one go-to rescue behavior to get us out of this pain. And that can be sex, it can be alcohol, or whatever. That's one of the big problems of recovery, is people have to learn how to not follow through on those relapse triggers and find some of the healthy behavior to deal with it.
So this person asked for clarification. What do you mean by primary emotion versus stress, anger, or whatever? So could you clarify a little bit more, please?
Okay, so if we drill down, there are basic sets of kind of core emotions, and different people have different lists, but usually there are 4 or 5 or 6 of them. And, happy, sad, afraid, hurt, those are often, I think, the core ones. But those sort of primary feelings. And then once we're feeling with those, and it's really almost the same dynamic I just described, I may not want to feel hurt, because hurt is an old painful feeling that reminds me of a whole bunch of other crap in my life. And so I just go automatically to anger. I kind of, that hurt gets converted into anger. Like what Tammy said before, it's easier to kind of push out. It makes us feel more alive and in control. And so one of the great ways I think it was useful for me, because like many addicts, I think I was just up in my head and, no life below the neck. And so I often ask my clients, like, what are you feeling in your body? Where are you feeling it? And that sometimes can give you clarification. If you have tension in your stomach, or you're shallow breathing, or you have stress in your temples, and each of us have unique patterns of where those different feelings express themselves in our bodies. And it's really useful. It's like learning a second language sometimes, to kind of see. And oftentimes I'll know that I'm going to be experiencing a feeling before I feel it, just because my body's starting to give me clues. So that ability to be self-aware, I think, is important. But I would boil it down. It's like distilling the emotions down to their simplest level. Because one thing all addicts and their partners can do is make things complicated. And I think it's really important to be real simple in this, and keep it to a few, hurt, happy, sad, angry is a secondary, but yeah, fearful. Yeah.
And it's hard. Like I said, it was really easy for me to get in touch with the anger, but I really didn't like getting in touch with the hurt. But that's when the healing started, is when I was able to drill down to that and go, I am hurt, and I survived it. And, did it feel good? No, but with addiction, I was so used to numbing it out. I did that at all costs. I remember early on, someone in the program said, what are you feeling? And I was like, I don't know. I'm just feeling, and I'm feeling a lot, and I hate it, and it didn't matter if it was good or bad. I didn't know how to do that, because I had so numbed out by using my addiction to escape all emotions. So one of the benefits of recovery is I actually get to experience true emotion. I really get to feel the good, and, I have to feel the painful sometimes too, but, I'll take it on any day. I'll take it. So, yeah. Okay. Next question. My wife had affairs a year ago and told me about it in the summer, and then just recently found out also as recently as last month while she was out of town for trauma treatment for 2 months. So it sounds like there was another affair a couple months ago, and she said she's not doing it anymore. In therapy, on SAA meetings, etc., but I still find evidence of her linking to score, or looking to score. I'm working on getting new contacts. How do I know if I can ever trust her again? Complicated.
Indeed, that's complicated. Well, it sounds like there's an ongoing pattern and an ongoing kind of active addiction there, which needs to be addressed. You mentioned that she was getting trauma treatment. It's unfortunate that she had the opportunities to act out during that, because those trauma, for the reasons we just talked about, anytime we have stress, digging up old feelings, it feels like life and death. You know, we don't want to feel that. Even hurt, I don't want to feel that. And it's that child's experience of life and death. So in a situation like trauma treatment, it's natural that people would want to act out and numb and dissociate from those feelings. So it's unfortunate that she did that instead of maybe getting the full benefit of the treatment opportunity. You know, we opened up this group tonight. We're talking about trust and people not always being totally upfront, even once there's a little bit of light shed on the situation, there's a crack in the wall, we still often don't know all that's behind it. Because as we said, the addict often only reveals what they have to reveal in that situation until they really come to accept their own behavior. So I would, I guess, just say that trust probably isn't a priority right now. I know it is for you, but I mean, the situation you're in with her acting out, I think this is the time for both of you to get support that you need. And I would probably say professional support, especially for you, and not to fix you, but to help you, give you some skills to deal with this and all the feelings that you must be having during this process. And I think she needs to really get serious about her recovery. Sounds like she's going to meetings, and it's not unusual to struggle and have slips and lapses. But I think at this point, the important thing is for each of you to kind of take care of yourselves, and trust is, to me, comes down the road a little bit. And once the behavior's changed and there's some healing going on. And as we said before, the addict always wants the trust faster than the partner. But I really encourage you to get your own support right now.
And I've got, I'm sorry.
And just to point out, point out discrepancies in her behavior to see them between what she's saying, what she's doing, but ultimately take care of you.
Yes, and to that point, we're working on having a men's partners drop-in group. There, you are welcome on the partner drop-in group, but I've had a number of men that have said, where's the support for us? We want to have that. So I'm working on it. But I also know of a couple of therapists that are working with men partners specifically. So feel free to reach out for me about that. How do I know if I can ever trust her again? And I agree with David. Right now, you don't. And, it usually takes a year to 18 months before the partner of consistent behavior where, like I mentioned earlier, if you say you're going to be home at 5:30, you are, you're going to show me your phone, the person's calling their sponsor, whatever, like all the things that the addict says that they're going to do, they're doing, and they're working on rebuilding trust. Out of the Doghouse was written to men, but I have had I've had male partners hand it to their wives and say, here, read this, because it works in reverse as well. If she's acted out, then, there has to be a rebuilding of trust. And, there's enough information in there that you can figure out what you need to do in order to rebuild the trust. So hopefully that's somewhat helpful. And then the female addict says, how long does it take to generally get forgiveness and trust? And forgiveness is, forgiveness is really something we do if I forgive somebody, I do it for myself. It doesn't mean I forget or I give them, it's all good. It really is that I just don't want to carry the weight of this anymore. So it doesn't mean that I necessarily, excuse it. In fact, it doesn't mean I excuse the behavior, but I just am saying I'm willing to move forward with that. But trust, like I just said, a year to 18 months of consistently showing up, consistently doing what you're supposed to do, going to meetings. I hope you have a sponsor. I hope, I hope you're working with other female sex and love addicts to have a support group, a group of people that you can consistently call on. That's all pieces of that, but it just takes time. So thoughts, David?
No, I agree with everything you said. And the piece about forgiveness is really important too, because when we forgive, when I forgive someone, it's to release me from, as you said, the burden of that, just to not keep draining my energy with that. And that takes time too. That means moving past any hurt I may be experiencing and dealing with my own feelings as they come up. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think everything that I agree with.
Yeah. So I know oftentimes addiction comes with relapse, and this person is saying, I'm not sure I can continue this relationship. Although I'm in love with this man, he has hurt me very deeply. Totally understand that. And I want him to have nothing to do with the other woman and her child. I want him to sign off and walk away so we can rebuild. I don't think I can if he has to parent with her. So, thoughts, David?
Well, I would say certainly addiction comes with relapse. We have to walk this fine line between acknowledging that it's going to happen, but not kind of making it so commonplace that it's permissible, if you will. So I think it's important to understand that, yeah, it is going to happen. We see that, especially with stimulants and sex, even more than heroin or alcohol. These are the way those two behaviors work in the brain. They're highly addictive, and the relapse is part of the healing. Now, do we want to have relapses? Obviously not. But I think they do happen. In the best possible scenario, people can have a relapse and gain something from it. They gain understanding. It's like they learn, oh wow, this is where I went wrong in this situation, and next time I'll know better, and I can learn from it. So in that sense, they do work. I think they're very common. I think it's very rare probably to have a relapse-free recovery. So I think that's important. You say you're in love with a man even though he's hurt you, and that's understandable and common. And it's also common for what you say about wanting to kind of set boundaries and not have anything to do with him in this situation or that situation. These things, as we said before, it's really hard to predict how they work out. I think that it's best to, I don't know what kind of insight your partner has into this, if he's even pursuing his own recovery. But I think, again, it goes back to you taking care of you. And I think one thing, and you mentioned you're a healthcare person, to really look at good boundaries for you. And in terms of just, these are my limits, this is what I will not put up with, as a way of kind of stopping the messy kind of flow of emotions that can be confusing, if nothing else. And so, again, bring the support back for you. I'm a therapist. I need my own therapy. I need my own support. And so, even though I may know all the answers in a book, if I'm living it, there's a whole different experience. And I need those outside voices kind of giving me some support back. So I would really, again, focus on taking care of you. There are boundaries in terms of what you'll find acceptable. I think at this point, it sounds early on in the situation where you say, I don't think I can, if he has to co-parent. So all that's kind of down the road in a way. I think you're right now, it sounds like in a little bit of a crisis. And I think it's important to kind of identify the elements of the crisis and deal with those and stabilize those and get yourself the support systems in place. And then those kind of long-term decisions start to unfold. But I wouldn't jump there right away. I know we want to, because we want to assure ourselves and like, okay, this is what it's going to be. This whole situation is so painful. I got to make it this way. But I think it's best to just kind of sit with your feelings, get your support, and see what happens.
Yeah, I always want people to have action rather than reaction. And I agree with David. You are in probably a major crisis. I mean, this is a major crisis for you and your family right now. But I think, you're a mental health professional. I suspect you would advise a client to not be reactionary, to get support. A therapeutic separation may be where you and your husband need to go right now. And that's understandable. And, but be intentional about, what you do. And rather than, saying things if you do this, then, I'm going to do that. There are things that you can do that will be supportive of you, and just say, I don't know what I want right now. I don't know. I can't even think about that right now. I just need to take care of me and our children, and, and I think that you can get there. with that. And you asked, does relapse mean he will have sex with someone else again? The thing with sex addiction, and David can, elaborate on this too, but, there's 20 different types of sex addiction. So, I mean, like, was he using porn? Like, I don't know all the things that he was doing, but, there are, people come up with a plan, and, these are the behaviors that, inner circle, outer, or middle circle, outer circle. This is complicated, and he needs guidance to get through all of this. But there's also plans for, if I relapse, I will, if he looks at porn and, he's got 24 hours to tell you, or something like, I mean, there's so much, and we can't impart all of that to you in this short amount of time. But, I implore you to get support with all of this. Your thoughts on that, David, too, with, relapse?
Yeah, I agree with everything you say. I would just add that, relapse is a process. You said, well, does that mean no sex with someone else again? Relapse really starts with usually a painful feeling or a situation, and then that whole numbing process starts, and it ends up in behavior. But relapse starts really with the attitude and the intention, and it may not be the behavior acting out yet, but you can see it coming from a mile away if you know what to look for. At least the person, the partner, the addict can, once they get some self-awareness. So I think just to be aware that relapses aren't inevitable, but they do happen over a process. And if we start to recognize the early signs and symptoms, we can intervene long before they grab hold of us. Because there's this point, especially with sex and stimulants, that there's this point of inevitability. The more we're kind of playing around with it, maybe just going on the apps to see who's around, or going on porn for just a few minutes or whatever, that's lighting up our brain, as we said before, and it's starting to sort of make it inevitable. And so, yeah, but I'd say support.
Yeah, I agree. There's a question in the chat, so I'm going to read that one to you. How common is it for sex addicts to lie compulsively? After disclosure, is it common for them to continue lying? How long does it typically take for an addict in recovery to stop lying to their partner? Questions about lying, can you tell?
So, part of the dynamics of addictive behavior is this building this sort of secret lives, right? And lying, unfortunately, goes with that. I think one of the key watchwords, and it's part of this site here, is integrity. And I think it's important for someone to own their feelings and be true to their word. And that's certainly kind of the opposite of lying, obviously. And so I think it's an expectation, and it's something that people need to do. Now, how long does it take? To me, that's an individual process. What I've often seen is that addicts often have histories of some of the kind of family dysfunction where they may have had a hostile father, for example, and they lied to cover themselves. They lied to survive, to be safe, to not admit something because they'd get beat up or something. And so I think sometimes these patterns, and I see this in adults who kind of lie for no reason, right? Just to say that, but the first answer is sometimes to say something that's not even true, and sometimes they even say, "Why did I even say that?" So it's this automatic response, and it's an old wired pattern that needs to be changed. It's essential that it gets changed, because this is all about integrity and owning what we've done and what we're thinking and feeling for the sake of our relationship. That's just the basis of it. In terms of timing, I mean, I can't. I would say it probably follows the same lines as trust in terms of hopefully ending sooner. But I've seen clients who became pretty transparent in most areas of their lives, but really had trouble with a few things they held on to, and those became issues to deal with. Because I really believe, as an addict, we have to give up all of that. We can't we can't pick and choose what parts of our lives we're going to keep secret or lie about, the whole thing has to be kind of wiped clean and opened up. Sunlight. So probably it's not as a specific answer as you'd like, but I think it takes time.
Well, and I was thinking, so after disclosure assumes that there is a level of recovery. So that means that this person is working on and has a plan for for recovery and relapse prevention. So hopefully that is the case. And like I said, with relapse, many people have if I lie, then within 24 hours, I have to, fess up. And then it's kind of like, okay, then, you fessed up, we'll, keep moving on. It isn't a relapse or whatever, so all of that needs to be decided. But like David said, it's about congruency. I want to be transparent and congruent in all areas of my life, and it will be a problem for me if I'm not, and therefore I will be at a higher rate or I have a higher probability of relapse if I don't get all the pieces of me together. So, that leaves me vulnerable. So it is a goal for people who really are trying to be in recovery to have alignment and integrity in their life.
And I would say it just doesn't add to the risk for relapse, but it hurts. If you're that person in recovery and you're being dishonest about something, it doesn't feel good. Recovery really kind of takes apart those systems that used to numb us or give us soothing relief. That doesn't work anymore in recovery. So that's another reason to kind of give it up, because it doesn't feel good.
Well, and it keeps us away from you, because we know that you don't really know us. Because if it's kind of like, if you really knew us, then you wouldn't love us. But we're intentionally keeping that piece away, and keeping the veneer, we think, of, we look good this way. Well, it's not true. So hopefully the addict in your life is, working truly on having a program of recovery. So. And then honestly, then the honesty between the two of you, but in all areas of the addict's life, really becomes a reality. So we have one final question. I'm in a platonic friendship with a man, so this is a female. In one sense, I'm happy with the boundaries that have been respected, and I'm getting to know him in a non-sexual way. At the same time, I fantasize and get a little obsessive about him. Given my early stage in SLAA, how do you suggest I handle myself in the friendship? My sponsor does not give direct advice.
So I think that kind of has a little bit of the flavor we talked about before of kind of love and romance addiction, with the fantasy of it, right? The idea of it, and it's a way that that fantasizing is a way that we can kind of get out of ourselves and out of our lives sometimes, just to daydream when we start to obsess about someone, right? That takes us out of ourselves and becomes an addictive kind of focus. So you say you're in the early stage of SLA recovery. I would suggest really, first of all, being fully disclosure about this to your sponsor and your support group, and have real-time kind of management and processing of these feelings. And I would also say, as a therapist, I would kind of back off from this relationship right now. And that's a choice that can be made, and other people might have different opinions. But I think at your early stage of recovery, to put yourself in a situation where you're kind of tempted or being pulled into that can be unnecessarily complicated. So I'd be cautious about that. But I think for what we were just talking about, to go back and see, okay, what's really going on? When you think about this guy, what's the fantasy there? What's the romance? And what part of your life maybe are you detaching from a little bit in that? But the other things, being that you're new, I would just, this is powerful stuff. It's mood changing. That limerence thing we talked about is mood changing, and it's as strong as any drug on the market. So be careful, because you're playing with fire in a way by entertaining those fantasies.
Yeah, I agree. And sponsors are great, but there's also the group conscience. You have other people in the group that can be, helpful with that as well, I suspect. So we are out of time. Thank you, Dr. David Fawcett, for being on the webinar tonight. And thank you to all of you who participated and asked such great questions. Please join the other webinars. You can see Dr. David on the 2nd and 4th Wednesdays of the month at 5 p.m. Pacific time. So I invite you to join his webinars, listen to the podcast. As mentioned, drop-in groups. Like I said, Brittany Mangum has a partners drop-in group, and male partners are welcome as well on this Wednesday at 12:30 Pacific time. I think
and
that's
my group on the second and fourth Wednesdays really is addiction recovery, just general issues, very similar to the topics we talked about tonight. So if you would like more of this, be sure to visit.
That'd be great. Yeah. And like I said, if you haven't listened to some of his previously recorded ones, start with the resiliency one, but but keep going through them too. So thank you, David. Thank you all.
Thanks, Tammy. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Bye.